South Dakota Synod. It's so good to be with you, and I'm so excited to share these conversations that are coming in on this Advent season. Hi, I'm Pastor Joel Paikin. I'm your director for Rural Ministries, and with us through the season of Advent is Reverend Dr. Anna Madsen. And hey, Anna,
Hello, it is always a pleasure to be with you and with the
ah,
South Dakota Synod.
it's good to be together, right?
Yes.
So we're going to go ahead and have some conversations around our Advent text.
Right. I think that there are a number of themes that are crucial. We mentioned a little bit in that first chit chat that we had a
Mm.
couple weeks back that has been recorded, that we are now entering into the season of Advent, but also therefore the season of Matthew. And I think that it's really important to highlight, perhaps in this very first specific week of Advent, some of the distinctions that are, or at least one primary one. There will be others that will percolate up to the surface. But Luke, who also scholars believe wrote Acts, he had a primary agenda of focus of lifting up the poor, and addressing many texts to the poor and not to the exclusion, but it's very clear that Luke had as his agenda a desire to center the poor. Um, Matthew, in a sense, does as well, but the way that Matthew does that is by centering the unrighteousness of the rich, the powerful, and the oppressors. And so they come at it in very different ways. We have to remember that Matthew was a Jew, and because of that, he's picking up on themes that have been echoing throughout the Jewish scriptures from day one, right? And so he's wanting to demonstrate that what he is saying is not inconsistent with what has been said. So it's important to pay attention, I think, not only to the shift of perspective between Luke and Matthew, even though they come out at the same place, more or less, but also to notice that Matthew is trying to show his cachet to the Jewish audience by
Yeah.
saying, look, I'm not making this up. This is what has been said time and time and time and time again. So Matthew is all about a hard word for the oppressors. And what you're
Mhm.
going to see is that there are hard words for the oppressors throughout all of our texts, not just this Sunday, but throughout Advent.
So, Anna, you were sharing that the Jewish nature of the author of Matthew, right? That he's deeply giving his street cred when he gives that long genealogy that we get,
Mhm.
right, in Christmas. That's Matthew. So, in some ways, we want to look at what is happening in our Old Testament and our Hebrew scriptures to kind of clue us into what Matthew is saying. And so, uh, thinking about that Isaiah text, because one of the things that we talked about with our Synod Authorized Ministers gathering was about place and identity in Advent,
Right.
right? And so when we think about place in Isaiah, all the nations shall stream to it. So that's just Isaiah 2:2. All the nations shall stream to it. Um, we talked a little bit, and I think this might have been, I might have brought this up in our conversations. Nations there, the word is goy.
Yeah, right.
Could you tell me and tell us all a little bit more about um, the context that you know for that word or how it might have been used? Because Matthew, right? He's talking about place. He's giving a social identity in his gospel. Um,
Right. So I want to be clear that I am a number of things, but a Hebrew scholar is not one of them. However, this notion of the nations is really crucial because it is this expansiveness, and
mhm.
so there's this wild welcome, right, that we see here, and I want to highlight, I think, a couple of things with that as well. Um, it just like we'll hear it later in the season with Matthew 25, we hear also Matthew talk about the nations. Now, I don't have the Greek text in front of me, so I can't remember what the word is and how that might translate with the Hebrew. But I wouldn't be surprised if it would be a Greek version of Goyim. But what we find in Matthew 25 with the separation of the sheep and the goats is that it's not individuals who are being separated. No, no, it's nations. It's nations who are going to be judged. And on what? Because of whether they have personally accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior? Nope, nope, nopity, nope, nope, nope. It's rather, have you fed? Have you welcomed? Have you clothed? Have you visited the outsiders, right? The marginalized. And if you have, regardless of whether or not you are a believer of Jesus the Christ, which is, anyway, oxymoronic at the time, but or
Yeah.
anachronistic at the time. But nonetheless, that isn't the issue. The issue is, have you been just? Have you
Hmm.
been kind and charitable, right? And so one of the pieces that I think is really important, right away from this text in Isaiah, is that you get a sense a little bit here of the identity of the one who to whom these people are streaming, and it's one who is not invested in war and acrimony and hate, but rather the sword shall be, made into plowshares. There's a revelation there of identity. And that's a theme certainly that we're going to be revisiting throughout the entire season of Advent.
So in Isaiah, we have this holy mountain. All the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob." All right. It's beautiful imagery. For me, this is one of those quintessential Advent texts. He shall judge between the nations, shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Ah, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. So there's just beautiful imagery. It's so captivating. And I want to actually just lift up too for this the psalm for this first Sunday in
Hmm.
Advent. Psalm 122 verse 8 is one of those texts that I highlighted for myself. For the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be with you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. This is very communal.
I mean, that would be such a wonderful thing to somehow or another make and have within a home, of one a dwelling of one sort, because it is a benediction, it is a blessing, it is a well-intentioned piece. Um, is in Piece. The one caveat perhaps that I would say
Mhm.
is that the word peace, I think, here is oftentimes misunderstood. We are ensconced in the land of Minnesota nice, which is really, the land of Minnesota passive aggressiveness, right? I mean, that nice,
Maybe for this, maybe it's the Odas, right? Because
that
we have that
yes,
niceness, that
absolutely.
passivity here in
Yep.
South Dakota too. We're in the Odas. Yep, yep,
Yep, absolutely. You're exactly right.
yep.
And so when people hear the word peace, they oftentimes think about it in the same way as we hear that phrase, keep the peace. Let's
Mm,
just not cause drama. Let's just not say
right.
anything.
Yeah.
And I cannot say how much that is not what that word means in Hebrew. And that word, we looked it up, I think, with the Sams there, is a
I
word
did.
that is shalom. And we are very familiar with the word shalom, but shalom is not a one-to-one to peace. And shalom means it means that which happens after a struggle. I was reminded by Dr. Marie Har, who was a colleague of mine when I was there in Sioux Falls, and he reminded me that the word Israel literally means to wrestle. And we don't do that so very much as Christians, and certainly not as Otans, right?
Right. Right.
We don't
Yeah.
do that. And these days there is definitely neither peace nor arguably shalom, because we try and avoid having these hard conversations, certainly within the church. But one of the pieces that I think is so important is to again name some of the challenges that are facing us so that there can be some measure of shalom. It is not a
Mm.
piece that is about, personal security. It's in fact just the opposite of that, the
Mm.
antithesis of that. And also, it is not a piece that happens because we're not talking about hard things and we're not saying hard things. No, because if you create a culture, if a congregation creates a culture where those hard things cannot be said that will yield shalom, then what you're doing is insulating yourself from hearing words of salvation, right? You're asking to be lied to, and your leaders are not liars. And so to it's one thing to think that this is beautiful, and it is also.
Right.
These are hard words.
Yeah.
These are very hard words. Yeah, hard and hopeful.
And I think there's like that can be encouraging when we hear it as a community.
Yep.
Um, it can just be hard when we're on our own. Uh,
Exactly right.
mm,
Right. And I think this is why that Lutheran notion that we are all saints and all sinners, and let's
mm.
be saints and sinners together. Right? I
Yeah.
think that that's a real gift that we can give to the broader church, not and and of course ourselves as well.
Hmm. For us going forward, do we want to say anything on Romans before we
I think
jump
a
into the?
quick thing on Romans that we want to say is in 13:12, let
Hmm.
us then throw off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. So I think two quick things that need to be said here. One is that you have an amazing song to complement, I think, this text.
Oh, sure.
But also, I think the reminder that particularly in these racially charged moments, to recall that not all light is good and not all dark is bad, and in fact, they can complement each other wonderfully. In fact, last night we were up late and then early up this morning watching the Northern Lights, which we can't see were there not to be the dark. And I've sent some of the
Hmm.
pictures from earlier, and you
Yeah.
have some glorious ones as well. But also, here we are, it is what, 20 to 4, and the sun is setting. And we love calibrating our bodies to the early dark and the late sun here, right? There's blessing in that. So to just be alert to the temptations to make all things dark bad and all things light good throughout this season, because those are phrases that and themes that come up time and again. But the other piece is this notion of armor, which seems again to be sort of discomforting, because we don't think of ourselves as Christians as being people of battle. At least generally we don't. But
Hmm.
the armor, I think that he might be referring to, or one way of perceiving what that armor is the armor of remembering your baptism,
Hmm.
right? That armor is simply the promise. My late mentor Walter Bowman really helped ground my understanding of the gospel as not being that your sins are forgiven, and not being that God loves you, though those are true. The gospel is that Jesus is risen, and that affects everything. There's nothing that falls outside the scope of that good news. And so then he said, now that you know that death doesn't win, there is more to do with your lives than preserve them, which is, in a sense, sort of battle imagery, right? Because the temptation is to protect yourself from being vulnerable, or to protect yourself from a shift that's difficult. And so, if you are facing a question of should I do this or should I not do this, ask yourself. What are you afraid of? And is that more pressing, or does it have more potency than the promise of Jesus is risen? So I think to think about armor as being a promise. Death doesn't win. Death, it has a word, but it is not the last one. That's your armor. What more can they take from what can they take from you? We oftentimes think about sin as being about morality, but rather it might be better understood as being about mortality. That when we make choices that are less than optimal, what death are we trying to keep at bay? Right?
Right.
When we decide not to say hard things, what death is it that we are trying to keep at bay? And might it also be, in point of fact, that you're keeping life at bay instead, right? And
Mhm.
that I think is a crucial piece to remember. But it is aided if every day we remember our baptism. What can wound us? We're baptized.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Now,
Um,
yep.
but
Should we have Matthew?
yeah, let's hit Matthew. Let's chat a little bit here about this Matthew text for the first week in Advent. What's standing out to you? Um,
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One is somewhat humorous, which is that first line about that day, an hour no one knows. And my one of my New Testament professors, Mark Allen Powell, would say, "Look, if anybody tells you that Jesus is coming on such and such a day, you can be assured that on whatever other day Jesus is going to be coming. It ain't that one
yeah. Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
no one knows, right?" And
Right.
so
Right. Yeah.
that's kind of a funny thing, and that I think of every time there are these horrible
Hmm.
promises of, that Jesus is coming on such and such a day. So there's that piece. But I think it's also that Matthew does what kind of bugs me as a reader and a writer. He's mixing a bunch of metaphors here, but on the other hand, I can
Uh-huh.
understand what he's doing. Some of us of a certain vintage might remember the bonkers Hal Lindsey frenzy of the 90s and this
Hmm.
whole business about being left behind. But it ain't
Yeah.
so clear, frankly, whether you want to be left behind or not be left behind in these particular texts. The question is less that and more, are you ready? And so this notion of being prepared, I think, is really crucial, which also lends itself very happily to one of my Advent agendas, and I obviously have several. But one of them is that the whole point of Advent is to wait. Like, Advent's got one job, and that's to wait. And so it makes me absolutely flip out when I start already seeing people, with all due respect, right? As my daughter would say, with
Hmm.
peace and love. But I would
Yeah.
invite people to
Yeah.
ask themselves, why is that necessary to rush to Christmas when we're not there yet, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that's indicative of the reason why Advent is such a gift to us. Because we are rushing all the time, all the blame time. We're hurried and therefore we're harried. And Advent says, stop, right? He's
Yeah.
not here yet, right? So take a breath, prepare. What does it mean to be ready? And it isn't like Jesus is coming quick, look busy. That isn't the point. It's rather to be to wonder whether your identity is aligned with what you think it is, and what
Hmm.
we know Jesus expects it to be.